The training grounds always smelled of sand, sweat, and gun oil. For recruits, it was both a battlefield and a proving ground where legends were born, and dreams ended with a single failure. Among them stood a woman who looked like she belonged to the first group. She carried herself like steel, chin high, shoulders square, with the quiet determination of someone who had been fighting battles long before she ever stepped into uniform. From day one, she ran faster than most of the men in her platoon. She dominated the obstacle course, climbing rope walls with calloused hands and sprinting across beams with the balance of an acrobat. In the pool, she swam like she had been raised by water, pulling herself through punishing laps until others were coughing on the edge. If resilience could be measured, she would have been at the top of the charts. But when the rifle was placed in her hands, she became someone else. The firing line stretched under the cruel sun, the sand reflecting the heat back at their boots. Instructors paced behind the line of recruits, voices sharp as razors. Check your safeties. Lock and load. She moved with practiced precision, the mechanics of the weapon second nature after weeks of drills. The M4 carbine fit snug against her shoulder, the stock pressed tight against her vest. Her finger hovered lightly along the frame, exactly where it was supposed to. Everything about her posture screamed discipline. The command came, fire. Rifles thundered in unison. The air filled with the acrid sting of gunpowder. Paper silhouettes downrange danced under the hail of bullets. One after another, rounds struck home-tight groupings in the chest and head zones. Except hers. Her shots tore the dirt inches from the target. One went so high it clipped the wooden frame. Another veered wildly left, as if fired by someone who had never touched a gun before. The instructor stormed over, his cap pulled low, his expression tight with anger. What the hell was that? Her jaw clenched, but she didn't flinch. Adjusting, sir. Adjust faster. You won't get second chances out there? She reset, realigned, inhaled deeply, and squeezed again. Crack. The bullet bit into the target stand, missing the silhouette entirely. A chorus of mutters rippled down the line. Other recruits exchanged glances. A few shook their heads. At the end of the session, the scorecards were collected. The verdict was damning. She had failed her weapons qualification. The barracks at night were less forgiving than the instructors. Whispers traveled faster than fire in dry grass. She's strong, but useless with a rifle. She's gonna wash out. She's holding us back. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out their voices. Her roommates tried to mask their pity, but pity cut sharper than mockery. Every word she overheard dug into her like shrapnel. Still, every morning, she laced her boots tighter. She refused to break. The second weapons test arrived 2 weeks later. She had drilled relentlessly in her free time, studying manuals, rehearsing breathing cycles, memorizing every line from every marksmanship lecture. She had done everything right. She had to pass this time. But when the line opened fire, her rounds betrayed her again. Some hit the target's edge, but none landed where they were meant to. The instructor stared at her, lips pressed tight in frustration. After the results were posted, the whispers in the barracks grew louder. She's done. Still, she stayed up late that night, disassembling and reassembling her rifle in the dim glow of a desk lamp. Fingers worked like clockwork, moving with mechanical certainty, though her heart weighed heavier with every click of the weapon's parts. The third test was brutal. The instructors were done being patient. Last chance, one warned. You fail again, you're out. The sun was merciless that day, beating down on the range like it wanted to melt them into the sand. Sweat trickled down her temple, soaking into her collar. She squared her shoulders, blocked out the whispers, and told herself, this is it. At the command, rifles barked. Dust and smoke filled the air. Her weapon bucked against her shoulder, but the rounds fell wide again. One punched into the dirt 5 feet from the target. "God damn it," the instructor growled, shaking his head. She held her rifle tighter, her knuckles white, rage and despair tangling in her chest. Her body had done everything right: her grip, her stance, her breath, her trigger squeeze, but the bullets refused to obey. By the time the line went cold, her score was the lowest on the board. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. People said it to her face. "You don't belong here." She bit her tongue until it bled. What none of them knew, what even she didn't fully realize, was that there was a reason for her failures, a reason hidden in plain sight. At the far end of the line, an older SEAL instructor stood watching her, arms crossed, eyes sharp. He wasn't laughing like the others. He wasn't shaking his head in disgust. Instead, he was studying her hands. And for the first time, someone saw what everyone else had missed. The barracks were never silent. Even when the lights went out, and the metal bunks rattled under restless bodies, whispers crawled through the air like smoke. Conversations drifted across the narrow hallways, bouncing off cinder block walls, weaving themselves into the cracks of everyone's minds. In training, reputation mattered almost as much as performance. And hers was becoming a burden that everyone wanted to comment on. "She's strong, but she can't shoot to save her life. She's slowing us down. She's a liability." The voices came from every direction, but rarely to her face. Recruits could be brutal, but even brutality had its cowardice. They preferred muttering in corners or smirking when they thought she couldn't see. She always saw. At night, she lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights overhead had dimmed, but the echoes in her head remained sharp. She would grip the edge of the thin mattress, forcing her jaw tight to stop herself from reacting. To respond would be weakness. Weakness spread fast in this place, and once it marked you, it never let go. She told herself she didn't care, that tomorrow she would prove them wrong. But when morning came, and boots hit the ground, she felt the stares. Every march to the mess hall, every lineup for drills, she carried the weight of invisible eyes. To them, she wasn't the woman who could outswim most of them or finish the obstacle course with seconds to spare. She was the one who missed every shot. And in this world, you weren't measured by what you could do. You were measured by the one thing you couldn't. The instructors never joined the whispers, but their silence spoke louder. One of them glanced at her during rifle maintenance drills, the faintest shake of his head betraying his doubt. Another muttered, "Hopeless," under his breath when her weapon jammed during practice. She heard it. She heard everything. Still, she refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking. Every night, when others slumped into their bunks exhausted, she stayed awake. She cleaned her rifle until her fingers smelled of oil and metal. She took it apart and put it back together in the dark, her hands moving on instinct. She practiced grip changes, sight alignment, and trigger squeezes until her knuckles ached. She whispered instructions under her breath, as if reciting prayers. Sight picture. Control the breath. Slow squeeze, not a pull. Her scarred hand trembled at times, the nerve damage making her grip falter. But she never admitted it. She never told anyone that the stiffness in her palm sometimes made it feel like her own hand was betraying her. Pride kept her silent. Pride and the fear of pity. The other recruits noticed her routines, of course. Some admired her persistence, though they'd never admit it aloud. Others mocked her obsession. She's practicing for nothing. Doesn't matter how many times she takes it apart, she still can't hit the damn target. The words stung, but they also fueled her. If she couldn't win their respect with scores, she would earn it with stubbornness. She told herself that was enough. But deep down, in the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, the doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Weeks into training, the barracks had developed an unspoken hierarchy. The strong naturally drew followers. The fast and skilled were respected, sometimes envied. Those who faltered were ignored or worse, ridiculed. She felt herself slipping into the last category. Conversations would stop when she entered a room, only to resume once she passed. During team drills, partners hesitated before being assigned to her. Nobody wanted dead weight. The loneliness was heavier than the rifle slung over her shoulder. Still, she pushed through. She smiled when others sneered. She marched in perfect formation, boots pounding in rhythm with theirs, even when her chest burned with frustration. She told herself it didn't matter what they thought, only what she achieved. But every failed test widened the gap. Every sideways glance reminded her that she was an outsider in the very group she longed to belong to. Then came the night that nearly broke her. It was after a long day of drills. She had already failed another mock range session earlier, her shots scattering across the target like raindrops on glass. That evening, while polishing her rifle, she overheard two recruits in the corner. Why is she still here? One whispered, "She's never gonna make it." Because the instructors like to drag out the inevitable. "She's gone next month." The first one laughed softly. "Bet she's gone next week." They didn't know she could hear them. She kept her head down, polishing the same spot on her weapon until her knuckles turned white. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to hurl the rifle across the room, to make them shut up. Instead, she breathed deep and focused harder on the metal in her hands. When they left, she finally allowed her eyes to close. Not in sleep, but in prayer, the kind of prayer that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with survival. The next morning, she woke earlier than the rest. The barracks still echoed with snores and shifting bodies. She slipped out into the cold, rifle slung across her shoulder, and walked to the empty range. No instructor. No recruits. Just her and the paper silhouettes lined up like an army of silent judges. She set her stance, steadied her breath, and fired. The shots missed. Again and again. Each failure slammed into her chest like a hammer, but she kept going. By the time the sun rose, she had burned through an entire magazine and left the targets untouched. When the first recruits began arriving, she gathered her gear in silence, sweat dripping down her brow, and left without a word. She didn't want them to see her broken. That afternoon, her platoon sergeant pulled her aside. His voice was sharp, but not cruel. "You can run. You can swim. You can outlast half the men here. But if you can't shoot, none of it matters. Out there, one bad shot can cost lives. Understand?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady, though her heart trembled. He gave her a long look, then walked away. It was the first time she felt the weight of truth. This wasn't just about passing tests anymore. It was about survival hers, and the people she would one day stand beside. That night, the whispers returned. They always did. But this time, she lay on her bunk and let them wash over her. Her scarred hand throbbed against the blanket, a reminder of battles she had fought long before this place. She stared at the ceiling and made a silent promise to herself. I will not fail forever. The barracks could whisper all they wanted. One day soon, they would have to be silent. Because one day soon, she would give them no choice. The air at the range felt heavier that morning. A storm of nerves swept through the recruits, though most masked it behind stoic faces. For her, the tension wasn't just pressure. It was a noose tightening with every step she took toward the firing line. This was it. Her third attempt. The instructors had made it brutally clear. 3 strikes, and she was gone. No more chances. No exceptions. A recruit who couldn't pass weapons qualification was a liability, not a soldier. She knew the statistics. Most who failed this many times were discharged before the ink dried on their training records. Her boots sank slightly into the sand as she marched to her lane. Sweat trickled down her temple, even though the sun hadn't yet reached its full fury. Around her, rifles clinked, magazines slammed, and bolts snapped forward with crisp metallic clicks. To the rest, it was routine. To her, every sound echoed like a countdown. She gripped her rifle tighter, scarred hand straining against the weapon's cold steel. This time has to be different. Load and make ready. The command thundered across the range. She racked the charging handle, the satisfying snap of the bolt chambering around doing little to calm the storm in her chest. She settled into her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, weapon snug into her shoulder. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt right. She had rehearsed this posture 1,000 times in the barracks after lights out. Targets up. Paper silhouettes popped up right in the distance, faceless shapes daring her to prove she belonged. Fire! The world exploded with gunfire. Around her, recruits' rifles barked in unison, brass casings ejecting into the air like golden raindrops. She inhaled, exhaled, focused through her sights, and squeezed the trigger. Crack! Her round tore into the dirt just below the target's chest. She blinked hard, trying to ignore the sinking feeling. Adjust. Focus. Fire again. Crack! This one flew high, missing the silhouette completely. Her jaw tightened. She fought to control her breathing, forcing every ounce of discipline into the rifle. Crack. Crack. Miss. 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 By the fifth shot, she could feel the heat rising from her neck, crawling up her face. She imagined the instructor's pens scribbling her failure onto paper already filled with red marks. She could almost hear the whispers of the recruits behind her. She's done. She's finished. But she refused to stop. She kept shooting. Her shoulders ached, her ears rang, her scarred hand trembled faintly on the grip, but she kept going. Each round a desperate prayer that the next one would find its mark. And yet, the paper silhouette stood untouched, mocking her. At the ceasefire call, she lowered her rifle. Smoke curled from the barrel, the acrid stench of gunpowder filling her lungs. Her target sheet flapped in the breeze, empty of bullet holes. It might as well have been laughing at her. Jesus Christ, one instructor muttered, walking down the line. He stopped at her lane, stared at the untouched target, then shook his head. 3 tests. 0 improvement. What the hell are you doing here? Her throat tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. I asked you a question, recruit. Sir, I am trying, sir. She barked, voice steady, though her insides quaked. Trying doesn't cut it out there. His voice dropped, colder now. Out there, trying gets people killed. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. Every word was a blade carving into her pride. The platoon filed off the line, most stealing glances at her as they passed. Some shook their heads. A few smirked. To them, her failure was already old news, expected and unsurprising. She stood alone, rifle slung across her chest, the silence pressing in on her. It would have been easier to cry, easier to scream, easier to walk away and admit they were right. But she did none of those things. She locked her jaw, swallowed the lump in her throat, and told herself she would keep going, even if it killed her. Because the alternative, quitting, was worse than death. At the far end of the range, one man hadn't moved. The SEAL instructor leaned against a post, arms folded, eyes fixed on her. Unlike the others, his gaze wasn't mocking. It wasn't impatient. It was calculating. He had spent years on battlefields, training recruits, and watching countless soldiers rise or crumble under pressure. He knew failure when he saw it, and he also knew when failure had a story behind it. Something about her didn't fit. She wasn't careless. She wasn't lazy. Her posture was near perfect, her discipline unshakable, her determination ironclad. This wasn't incompetence. It was something else. His eyes narrowed as she unloaded her rifle, hands moving with sharp efficiency. That's when he saw it. The scar. Pale, jagged, etched across her shooting hand like lightning frozen in flesh. It wasn't fresh, it was old, healed over years ago, but the stiffness in her fingers was subtle, just enough to disrupt her trigger pull and grip. Subtle enough for every other instructor to miss. But not him. His jaw set. He had seen injuries like that before, men who carried scars that never fully healed. Some never returned to shooting. Others adapted and overcame, building new ways to fight. The difference was always in the will. And this recruit? He had seen her will. Range secure. Another instructor shouted. The recruits gathered their gear, heading back toward the barracks. She started to follow, her shoulders heavy, her head lowered just slightly, just enough to betray the weight she carried. But the SEAL instructor didn't look away. Because in that scar, in that failure, he saw the beginning of something the others couldn't. He saw a soldier not defined by what she couldn't do, but by how far she was willing to go to change it. The day of reckoning hadn't ended with her dismissal. It had only just begun. The range was quieting down, but her mind roared like a battlefield. Failure clung to her uniform like sweat, heavy and undeniable. She had followed every instruction, every drill, every principle. She had done everything right except hit the target. Again, the recruits marched back in groups, laughter and chatter buzzing around her. To them, the range was just another drill, another step closer to graduation. To her, it felt like a wall too high to climb. Her boots dragged slightly in the sand, each step louder in her head than the last. But someone was watching. The SEAL instructor didn't walk with the others. He stayed behind, leaning against the wooden post at the edge of the range, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. Unlike the younger instructors, he wasn't irritated. He wasn't rolling his eyes or scribbling "fail" across a clipboard. He was studying, measuring. He had seen this pattern before recruits who fell apart because of nerves, because of fear, because they weren't cut out for combat. But this wasn't that. Her posture was flawless. Her reload smooth. Her transitions between stances sharp and practiced. No, her failure wasn't born of fear. It was something else. He watched her unload her weapon, hands moving automatically through the safety checks. That's when he saw it. The scar. It wasn't obvious at first. Not the kind of mark you'd notice unless you were looking for it. A pale, jagged line stretched across her palm and curled around the base of her thumb. A roadmap of an old injury. The skin around it was slightly taut, the fingers just a little stiff. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. To him, it explained everything. Trigger pull, grip, control. The very mechanics of shooting demanded subtlety, and that scar had stolen it from her. Every time she squeezed, the nerve damage twisted her accuracy by fractions that meant the difference between center mass and empty sand. He tilted his head, piecing it together. She hadn't failed because she was weak. She had failed because she was fighting with a hand that didn't fully obey her, and no one else had noticed. As she began to walk off, rifle slung across her chest, he pushed off the post and called out, "Recruit." She froze. The word cracked through the air like a whip. Slowly, she turned, eyes snapping to him. "Sir?" she said, standing straighter. He nodded toward the rifle still clutched in her grip. "Hand," she blinked, confused. "Sir?" "Your shooting hand," he clarified, voice firm but calm. "Show me." For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't used to people noticing. Most never did. She kept her injuries hidden under gloves when possible, or simply moved fast enough that nobody asked questions. But his tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't pitying either. It was curious. Slowly, reluctantly, she extended her hand, palm up. The scar caught the light, pale against her skin. The instructor's eyes flicked over it, then back to her face. "How long?" he asked. She swallowed. "Years, sir. Accident. Glass." He studied her in silence for a long moment. She felt exposed, vulnerable, in a way she hadn't since childhood. No one had ever asked. No one had ever cared enough to. Finally, he said, "Nerve damage?" She gave a short nod. "Some, sir." "Nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" His eyebrow lifted. "It's serious enough to throw off every shot you've taken since you got here." Her stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to defend herself, then shut it. What could she say? That she'd been too proud to admit the truth? That she didn't want pity or excuses? That she'd rather fail 100 times than be treated as broken? So she said nothing. The silence stretched. Around them, the last of the recruits were clearing out, their voices fading into the distance. It was just the two of them now, the hum of the range settling into stillness. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Why didn't you say anything?" Her jaw tightened. She forced her eyes forward, not meeting his. "Didn't want pity, sir." He studied her face, the set of her shoulders, the steel in her voice. Then, to her surprise, he chuckled not in mockery, but in respect. "Pity? No," he said. "What I see isn't someone broken. What I see is someone fighting with one hand tied behind their back and still refusing to quit." Her eyes flicked to his, startled by the words. For weeks, she had been drowning in whispers, in failure, in the crushing weight of expectations unmet. And here was someone for the first time who didn't look at her with disappointment or disdain. He looked at her like she was worth saving. It shook her more than failure ever had. He straightened, his voice regaining that sharp edge of command. "You've been trying to play by rules that don't fit your reality. That ends today." "Sir?" she asked carefully. "You don't shoot like the rest of them." "You can't, but that doesn't mean you can't shoot. It means you need to adapt. And I'm going to show you how." Her breath caught. Part of her wanted to believe him instantly, to cling to that sliver of hope. Another part braced for disappointment, for another failure that would only cut deeper. But when she met his eyes, there was no doubt in them, only conviction. The wind picked up across the range, tugging at their uniforms. She looked down at her scarred hand, the mark that had haunted her since the accident. For years, she had hidden it, resented it, let it define the edges of what she thought she could and couldn't do. Now, for the first time, someone was telling her it didn't have to be the end of her story. She curled her fingers into a fist, the scar stretching across her skin. And for the first time since training began, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, failure wasn't forever. When she finally returned to the barracks, the whispers were waiting, as always. But they slid off her shoulders like rain, because now she knew something they didn't. She wasn't finished. She was just getting started. The mess hall was nearly empty when she walked in that night. Dinner hours had passed, and only a few stragglers lingered cleaning trays, refilling coffee, or whispering in hushed tones about tomorrow's drills. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a pale glow across metal tables scratched with years of use. She carried her tray quietly, a half-finished sandwich and a bottle of water. Normally, she would sit at the far end, out of the spotlight, blending into the silence. But tonight, as she slid onto the bench, her mind was too loud to hide from. The scar, the instructor, the words he had spoken. She traced the rim of the bottle absent-mindedly, her fingers brushing the ridges, trying to replay the conversation. He had seen her. Not just her failures, not just her mistakes. He had seen the truth she had hidden for years. It scared her, because it meant she could no longer excuse herself as invisible. The sound of boots echoed across the hall. She looked up. It was him. The SEAL instructor walked with the easy authority of someone who didn't need to demand respect. He simply commanded it. His gaze scanned the room quickly, noting the empty tables, the few recruits huddled in corners. Then his eyes landed on her. For a heartbeat, she considered looking away, pretending she hadn't noticed. But she couldn't. He was already moving toward her. He dropped his tray across from hers and sat down. No introduction, no small talk. Just presence. "Recruit," he said, his tone steady. "Sir?" she answered, sitting straighter. For a long moment, neither spoke. He unwrapped his sandwich, took a measured bite, and chewed as if he had all the time in the world. She sat rigid, unsure if she should eat, if she should wait, if she should brace herself for another critique. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You've been fighting with that hand for how long?" Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again so soon. "Since I was 16, sir." "What happened?" She hesitated. Her instinct was to deflect, to shrug it off as unimportant. But something in his voice, though, even almost human, made her answer honestly. "Car accident," she said quietly. "Glass from the windshield. Cut deep. Doctor said I was lucky to keep the hand." He nodded, expression unreadable. "You've been training with it ever since?" "Yes, sir, and hiding it." She flinched slightly. "Didn't want it to define me." "Smart," he said. Then, after a beat, "But stubborn." Her brow furrowed. "Stubborn, sir? You think admitting a weakness makes you weak. That's the mistake." His eyes locked on hers, sharp and unblinking. "Weakness isn't the scar. Weakness is pretending it doesn't exist." The words stung, but not because they were cruel, because they were true. She looked down at her hand, flexing her fingers slowly, watching the skin stretch across the scar. She had lived in denial, trying to force perfection through sheer will. But denial hadn't stopped her bullets from missing the mark. "I don't want excuses," she murmured. "Good," he said quickly. "Because I'm not giving you any. Excuses explain failure. Adaptation prevents it." She glanced up, confused. His voice carried no pity, no softness. This wasn't about comforting her. It was about challenging her, reshaping her. "How?" she asked cautiously. He leaned back, studying her as if measuring whether she deserved the answer. "You've been taught to shoot like everyone else. Standard stance, standard grip, standard trigger pull. But you're not standard. That hand changes everything. Which means you change everything." She frowned. "You mean break the rules?" He smirked faintly. "I mean bend them until they work for you. The target doesn't care how you hold the weapon. It only cares if the bullet lands." She sat in silence, the words settling in her chest like a weight she wasn't sure she could lift. All her life, she had been told to do things the right way. In school, in sports, even here at training, the right grip, the right form, the right posture. But what if the right way wasn't her way? What if I can't adapt? She whispered. He gave her a look that was equal parts steel and fire. Then you fail. And if you fail, you wash out. That's the truth. But if you adapt, if you fight tooth and nail to find your way, then you'll be better than half the shooters out there, because you'll have learned to win with a disadvantage. Her chest tightened. She thought of all the nights she had cried into her pillow, frustrated at her body for betraying her, for leaving her less than whole. And here was this man, telling her that maybe, just maybe, her disadvantage could be turned into strength. The mess hall was nearly empty now. The last of the recruits had left, trays clattering into bins, doors swinging shut behind them. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the quiet. The SEAL instructor finished his sandwich, wiped his hands, and stood. Before leaving, he placed one firm hand on the table and leaned toward her. You want to know the difference between recruits who make it and recruits who break? Her breath caught. Yes, sir. It's not strength. It's not speed. It's not even skill. It's adaptation. The ocean doesn't care about your excuses. The battlefield doesn't care about your scars. You either adapt or you die. Remember that. He straightened, slung his tray under his arm, and walked away without another word. She sat frozen, his voice echoing in her mind. Adapt or die. It wasn't just advice. It was a lifeline. For the first time in weeks, she felt the faint stirrings of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. Not hope that the road ahead would be easy, but hope that it was still possible. That maybe she wasn't destined to fail. Her scarred hand curled into a fist against the table. She wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. That night, as the barracks went dark and recruits slipped into uneasy sleep, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every word, every look, every moment with the instructor replayed in her head. And with each replay, her resolve hardened. Tomorrow, she decided, she would no longer hide her scar. She would learn to fight with it, not against it. Because weakness wasn't in the scar. Weakness was pretending it didn't exist. And she was done pretending. The next morning broke with a chill in the air. Mist clung to the ground, softening the sharp lines of the training range. Recruits shuffled out in formation, boots striking the gravel in rhythm, rifles slung across their shoulders. She fell into line as always, but inside, something was different. The conversation from the night before echoed in her chest like a drumbeat. Adapt or die. She didn't know what the day would bring. She only knew that if the SEAL instructor gave her even half a chance to change, she would seize it with everything she had left. When they reached the range, the instructors barked their usual commands. Targets were set, distances measured, magazines loaded. The same ritual as every morning. But then he appeared. The SEAL instructor. His presence was unmistakable quiet, watchful, commanding without a word. The younger trainers deferred to him instantly, stepping aside as he scanned the line of recruits. His gaze landed on her. Recruit, he called. Her stomach tightened. She stepped forward. Sir, range is yours, he said simply, jerking his head toward an empty lane. Whispers rippled down the line. A recruit singled out by him? That didn't happen. It wasn't part of the script. She moved quickly, heart pounding, and took her place on the firing line. Load, he ordered. She slid the magazine into place, racked the charging handle. Stance. She dropped into her usual posture, feet shoulder-width apart, rifle snugged into her shoulder. Stop. The command froze her mid-motion. He stepped up beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint tongue of cordite and sweat on his uniform. Your stance is perfect for someone with two fully working hands, he said. But you're not that shooter. You've been fighting your body instead of working with it. That ends today. She swallowed. Yes, sir. Loosen your grip, he said. Her eyebrows twitched. Sir, you're overcompensating. You're strangling the weapon to force control you don't have. Loosen up. Let the stock take the recoil, not your hand. Cautiously, she eased her grip. The rifle suddenly felt unstable, almost slippery. Fear coiled in her chest. If she lost control of the weapon, she'd fail even harder. Trust it, he murmured. Trust the weapon. Trust yourself. she adjusted, breath shallow. Now, he said. Trigger pull. You've been taught to squeeze with the pad of your finger. That's not an option for you. Your nerve damage won't let you feel the pressure evenly. Her cheeks flushed. He was saying aloud what she had buried for years. So what do I do, sir? You adapt. He reached for her hand, not roughly, but firmly guiding her index finger. You're going to use the joint, not the pad. More leverage, less subtlety. You won't get delicate control, but you'll get consistency. And consistency wins. She stared at her scarred hand, now positioned differently on the trigger. It felt unnatural, almost wrong. But there was a strange sense of possibility. Take the shot, he commanded. She exhaled, sighted down the barrel. Crack! The shot rang out, echoing off the berm. She blinked, surprised the round had landed closer to center than any she had fired before. Not perfect, but closer. Her chest tightened. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope on the range. Again, he said. She fired. Another shot landed close to the silhouette's chest. Still not dead center, but steady. Again. She fired. The grouping tightened. 3 rounds nearly touching center mass. Her breath caught. She had never been able to do that before. Around them, other recruits had stopped firing. Curiosity peaked. Whispers hummed along the line, but she barely heard them. All her focus was locked on the target and the scarred hand that had just placed bullets where they were supposed to go. She lowered her rifle, chest heaving, a mix of adrenaline and disbelief flooding her veins. The SEAL instructor studied her quietly, then gave the smallest nod. Better, better. It was a single word, but it hit her harder than any insult, any failure, any setback. For the next hour, he drilled her relentlessly. Adjust your elbow. Don't fight the recoil guided. Shorter breaths. Don't chase the sights. Let them settle. Lean forward. Own the weapon. Don't let it own you. Every correction felt like chiseling away at the stone that had trapped her for so long. It was exhausting, her muscles burning, her hands shaking. But with each adjustment, each shot, she saw the pattern emerging. Tighter groupings, steadier rhythm, growing confidence. She wasn't just surviving on the range anymore. She was learning to fight back. By the end of the session, sweat poured down her back. Her arms ached, and her scar throbbed with every squeeze of the trigger. But when the final round punched, dead center into the silhouette's chest, something inside her broke loose. Not despair, not failure, relief. She lowered the rifle, trembling, unable to believe the paper target staring back at her. The instructor stepped forward, close enough that only she could hear. That scar doesn't make you weak. It makes you different. And different isn't failure. It's opportunity. Her throat tightened, eyes stinging. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of him. Yes, sir, she whispered. As the recruits were dismissed, she lingered on the range, staring at her target riddled with bullet holes, most of them clustered center mass. A week ago, it would have been a mockery of scattered misses. Now, it looked like proof. Proof that she wasn't finished. Proof that she could adapt. She ran her fingers lightly across the scar on her hand, feeling the raised line of tissue. For years, it had been a reminder of limits. Now, maybe, it could be a reminder of strength. Behind her, the SEAL instructor called out to the group. Training doesn't care about your excuses. The mission doesn't care about your scars. Adapt, or you don't survive. Remember that. She knew the words weren't only for the others. They were for her. That night in the barracks, while the others collapsed into exhaustion, she sat awake cleaning her rifle. Each swipe of the thin cloth across the barrel felt like ritual, like preparation for a new beginning. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would return to the range not as the recruit who failed every test, but as the one who refused to let failure define her. The scar would no longer be a curse. It would be her weapon. Graduation loomed like a storm on the horizon. One more test stood between the recruits and their future. Not all of them would make it. The instructors had reminded them every day, the course is designed to break you. If you don't bend, you snap. For her, it had always been more than just a test. It was the culmination of every failure, every whisper, every long night staring at the scar that had threatened to end her dream before it began. Now, it was her chance to prove once and for all that she wasn't broken. The sun had barely risen when the recruits were herded into formation. Rifles slung, gear strapped, eyes forward. The SEAL instructor stood at the front, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "This is it," he barked. "Your final trial. A simulated combat operation. Full mission profile. You'll move as fire teams, clear objectives, and neutralize threats under pressure. There will be noise. There will be chaos. And there will be no excuses. You either complete the mission, or you don't." His eyes swept the line. For a moment, they lingered on her. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for her to feel it. The scenario began with a thunderclap of sound, simulated artillery booming in the distance, smoke grenades spewing gray clouds across the field, sirens wailing overhead. The recruits dropped into formation, hearts pounding. Her fire team pushed forward into the maze of obstacles, mock buildings, barricades, and enemy silhouettes hidden in shadow. Shouts echoed across the compound. Instructors fired blank rounds from elevated platforms, simulating incoming fire. Contact left. Someone yelled. She dropped to a knee, rifle snapping to her shoulder. Crack, crack. 2 targets fell, her round slamming into center mass. The recoil jolted through her scarred hand, but she guided it smoothly, the way he had taught her. Adaptation wasn't theory anymore. It was instinct. The team advanced. Walls had to be scaled, doors breached, rooms cleared. Every corner held another test. She flowed with the group, but inside she felt the constant hum of fear. Don't slip. Don't fail. Not now. At one point, she came face to face with a steel pop-up target that swung out from a doorway. The split-second decision might have undone her weeks ago. Hesitation, nerves, fear of missing. But not today. She exhaled, finger pulling from the joint. Crack. The target slammed backward, clanging against the frame. Her team pushed through. Halfway through the mission, fatigue set in. Sweat poured down her back, her gear digging into her shoulders. The scar on her hand throbbed, raw from the constant grip of the weapon. The instructors had designed it this way, long enough to drain their strength, chaotic enough to unravel their discipline. Move, move, move. Her fire team sprinted into open ground. Suddenly, machine gun fire ripped across the field, simulated but deafening. The recruits hit the dirt, hearts hammering. The instructor's voice roared over the speakers. Return fire. Cover your team. She rolled onto her stomach, weapon pressed into her shoulder. Targets sprang up across the field, scattered at irregular distances. This was it. The scar burned like fire. Her hands shook. For a moment, doubt threatened to claw its way back. What if I miss? What if they see I'm still broken? Then she remembered his voice in the mess hall. Weakness isn't the scar. Weakness is pretending it doesn't exist. She inhaled, exhaled, crack, crack, crack. 3 targets dropped. She adjusted, tracked the farthest silhouette, led it just slightly. Crack, it fell. Her team surged forward under her cover fire. And for the first time in training, she didn't feel like dead weight. She felt like a soldier. The final objective was a hostage rescue drill. A mock enemy compound waited ahead, complete with screaming audio tracks, flashing lights, and instructors shouting over loudspeakers to simulate chaos. Her team stacked at the doorway, hearts slamming. The recruit in front kicked the door. They burst inside. Targets popped from the shadows, friend and foe mixed together. She moved as if in a trance. Muzzle flashes lit the room, the acrid smell of blanks stinging her nose. Her eyes locked on each silhouette, her rifle snapping from one to the next. Crack, crack. 2 enemies down. Another swung into view, almost hidden behind a civilian target. Her scar twinged as she adjusted, heart in her throat. One wrong pull, and she'd hit the wrong silhouette. She forced her breath steady, lined the sights, and squeezed. Crack! The enemy target dropped. The civilian remained untouched. Her chest heaved. She had done it. The room cleared. The hostage retrieved. The mission complete. Silence fell, broken only by the pounding of their breaths. Then, over the loudspeakers, the SEAL instructor's voice rang out. Mission accomplished. Back outside, the recruits assembled in the dirt. Faces streaked with sweat, uniforms caked in grime, rifles heavy in their arms. The SEAL instructor stood before them, eyes scanning the group. Some of you proved yourselves today. Some of you proved you don't belong. That's the way of it. The battlefield doesn't take everyone. It only takes those who adapt, endure, and overcome. He paused, gaze locking on her. You, he said, his voice cutting like a blade. Her chest tightened. You failed every weapons test at the start. You were counted out, written off. But today, he gestured toward the compound, you proved that failure is not final. You adapted. You fought. You delivered. The recruits turned to stare, some with surprise, others with grudging respect. She stood taller, shoulders squared, refusing to let the tears prickling her eyes fall. Yes, sir, she said, her voice firm. The ceremony weeks later was brief, but unforgettable. Rows of recruits stood at attention, their uniforms sharp, their boots polished to a mirror shine. Families watched from the stands, pride and relief written across their faces. When her name was called, she stepped forward, heart hammering. The SEAL instructor stood waiting. As she saluted, he returned it. Then, quietly enough that only she could hear, he said, You turned your scar into a weapon. Never forget that. She nodded once, words caught in her throat. The weight of the moment pressed into her chest, not as a burden, but as a victory. That night, long after the ceremony, she sat alone outside the barracks, staring at the stars. The air was cool, still, filled with the quiet hum of the bass. She looked down at her hand, tracing the scar that had once made her feel like she would never belong. Now it felt different. It was no longer a mark of weakness. It was a reminder of what she had survived, and what she had become. She closed her fist, the scar stretching across her skin, and whispered to herself, This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And somewhere in the distance, she thought she could almost hear his voice. Adapt or die. She smiled. She had chosen to adapt. And because of that, she would never die forgotten. The dawn air carried a sharp bite as the recruits assembled on the obstacle course. Unlike the sterile odor of the firing range, this ground smelled of churned dirt, sweat, and steel. Wooden walls towered overhead, rope climbs dangled like serpents, and mud pits gleamed with cruel anticipation. Today wasn't about neat targets or crisp stances. Today was chaos. The instructors called it a stress shoot, a brutal mix of physical punishment and weapons testing. The recruits would sprint, crawl, climb, and fight through the course. then grabbed their rifles and proved they could still shoot straight while their lungs screamed and muscles trembled. Failure meant elimination. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She remembered the scar, the way it had betrayed her before. But now, after hours of relentless drilling under the SEAL instructor, she felt a spark of defiance. Today, she would not fail. On the line, recruits dropped into a crouch, adrenaline already buzzing. The first whistle blew. They launched forward. Mud splashed, ropes swung, boots hammered the ground. She threw herself into the sprint, every stride pounding into her ribs. The obstacle course clawed at her walls, scraping her palms, gravel biting her knees, ropes burning against her skin. But she moved like a storm, faster, hungrier than ever before. "Move it, recruit!" An instructor barked as she scaled the cargo net. Her scar ached with every grip, the stiff pull of her fingers threatening to slow her down. But she pushed harder, teeth gritted, sweat streaking down her face. The voice of the SEAL echoed in her mind. "Adapt, don't fight." She shifted her grip on the rope, using her forearm and shoulder strength to compensate. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. She hauled herself over the top and slid down the other side, heart hammering. The recruits burst into the live fire zone, chests heaving. Targets popped up across the field, silhouettes of enemies at varying distances, some partially concealed, others sprinting on mechanical tracks. Her rifle was waiting in the sand. She scooped it up, slammed the magazine home, and chambered around. Around her, recruits were already firing, muzzle flashes strobing against the morning light. She forced herself to breathe. Trust the weapon. Trust yourself. She sighted down the barrel, finger curved at the joint, just as he had taught her. Crack, the target dropped. She pivoted, shoulders moving fluidly with the recoil. Crack, crack. 2 more fell. Her grouping wasn't perfect, but every round landed solid. A rush of triumph surged through her veins. For the first time under pressure, she wasn't just surviving, she was performing. Then came the moving targets. Metal rails whined as silhouettes zipped across the field, weaving unpredictably. Around her, recruits cursed, their rounds sparking dirt. Panic spread like wildfire, sweat slick hands fumbled, nerves broke under the weight of chaos. Her scar pulsed with pain, threatening to throw her aim. For a split second, doubt flickered. What if this was where she fell apart again? She closed her eyes briefly, just enough to remember his words, "The mission doesn't care about your scars." When she opened them, her hands were steady. She tracked the moving target, not chasing it desperately, but leading it slightly, breathing in rhythm with its arc. Crack! The silhouette jerked and collapsed. Crack! Crack! 2 more fell in rapid succession. Her body burned, her lungs clawed for air, but her focus tunneled. Each shot was a declaration. I am not broken. I am not finished. The final obstacle loomed, the long-range target. 600 yards out, a silhouette stood barely visible against the shimmering heat. Recruits dropped prone in the dirt, fumbling with their scopes. This was the test of patience, control, and precision. She pressed her cheek against the stock, heart pounding so hard it rattled her vision. Her scarred hand trembled slightly on the trigger. At this distance, even a fraction of a mistake meant a clean miss. She forced herself still. Slow breath in. Slow breath out. Adapt. Her fingers squeezed, not with the pad, but with the joint, exactly as he had taught her. The rifle barked, echoing across the range. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the distant clang of steel. Direct hit. She rolled onto her back, gasping, chest heaving against her vest. The sky above blurred with tears she refused to shed. Not from weakness. From relief. Around her, Other recruits were still firing, still missing, still scrambling. She had already hit her mark. The SEAL instructor's voice cut through the chaos. That's how you adapt. That's how you survive. He hadn't spoken her name, but she knew. The pride in his tone was meant for her. By the time the course ended, her uniform was soaked, her muscles screaming, her scarred hand raw from strain. But she stood taller than she ever had. She hadn't just passed. She had proved herself under fire. Whispers rippled through the ranks as they marched back. Some recruits stared at her with disbelief, others with respect, a few with envy. She didn't care. For weeks, she had been the failure, the whisper, the joke. Today, she was none of those things. She was the one who had refused to break. That night, she sat in the barracks with her rifle across her lap, methodically cleaning it as always. But this time, emotions weren't just ritual. They were gratitude. Every swipe across the barrel reminded her of the path she had taken, from failure to adaptation, from doubt to strength. The scar on her hand still ached, the skin stretched and sensitive. But for the first time in years, she didn't hate it. She traced it lightly with her thumb, whispering to herself, "This isn't weakness. It's proof." The proof that she could break limits. The next day, when the SEAL instructor passed by her in formation, he didn't stop. He didn't need to. As he walked past, he gave the slightest nod. It was enough. Because a nod from him meant more than 1,000 cheers. It meant she was no longer just surviving training. She was becoming something else. Something stronger,